Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're on page 1315. Aleph Shin Tezvov. And we're in a transition, essentially, from understanding the process of the Aveda that we do. And namely, as he said, of illuminating the darkness of this world and the concealment of the divine soul within the animal soul, within each one of us. So by Avedas HaBirurim, where we extract and free the divine sparks and elevate them. So firstly, we illuminate the darkness, but as he said, it's not just enough to dispel the darkness, you want to also transform it. So he's talking about ultimately transforming, but in the process, we have to talk about all the steps. And the first steps are first illuminating. First, you have to bring light into the picture. Like he said, first you have to get out of the mud. You have to get out of the grime and out of the darkness and slowly progress step by step with, like you spoke on page 1313. He spoke about the chikika mebachutz, the scraping or the chiseling from the outside and the chiseling from within. And he's all leading to an ultimate transformation. So the last few pages have been about what he calls expanding first of all, illuminating the darkness with the light, and then expanding the boundaries and the territory of the light, the domain of light, of Eira Gedusha, the light of Gedusha, expanding that domain of holiness through our Aveda. So the Netzutzes are all, the elevation of these sparks are all coming to increase the Eir, increase it both in quantity, quality, to a deeper level of Eir, Etzem Eir, and also bring it down into Biyah to permeate existence itself all the way below, as we learned yesterday. However, like he says, Omnam kol zeh b'chinas heisofas v'harchovas gvul ha'kedusha. All this is the addition and expansion of the boundary of holiness. That's the Eir that is being increased and added through our work, which is, of course, a tremendous thing. Chassidus talks about it in so many places, that we bring godly energy, we reveal Eir into this dark world. But then there's something even more. The Netzutzes Atzum Me'irim Etzarasme, this is not yet that the sparks themselves, meaning as they enter into existence itself, that itself radiates. It's all about increasing the narrative of the divine story, the divine narrative, the divine light in existence. A higher level is even higher than Yosef that we learned is Yosef a Safa, then Peres, which is the word Pesa. Yosef is the Birurim of bringing this deep light into even the lowest worlds. Higher than that is Yehuda, as he says in the parentheses at the bottom of page 1314 and top of 1315. But so this is all about the Netzutzah. And why is that the case? That we're still talking about light? Because the Aveda is about refining the animal soul, but it's not yet ishapcha. It's not total transformation. Because it's all about revealing the faculties of the divine soul, which is Eir, weakening the faculties of the animal soul. And even when we talk about that, the animal soul too is coming to a love and a yearning, it's still not bittul be'etzem mahuseh. Only in its hispashtus. It's not fundamentally changing the personality of the animal soul. It's just affecting its expression. So the expression of the animal soul has been illuminated by the divine soul to also yearn and love God. And even to the point where the animal soul itself is initiating, is getting stimulated on its own. It began with the divine soul, but now it's also been ignited also. Even that, he says, even though it's more be'etzem mahuseh than it was without that, in other words, it's reached a point where it's affecting its core essence, but it's not complete transformation. To say it's completely transformed, that's not the case. So therefore, it's still increasing in light. The focus is more on the Eir, not on the very cheshech and not the very essence of the animal soul. So that's where we stopped. We're up on the line. On the line began with the line that's Bechinas Sapcha. I think I stopped right there. Hagam shezeh yesher be'etzem mahusei, meaning there are levels of how the animal soul is impacted, like I explained yesterday. You could only impact it on simply subdue it. You could also change its perspective, but on a spashtus level, on the outer level. But it's fundamentally still remains Nefesh Habamis, like he says in Tanya. During davening, you could have the Nefesh Habamis cooperating even. It has it in its interest. But have you changed it to the point that its whole personality has become divine? No. That's what he's saying here. Vahainu, I'll continue reading from Vahainu, on page 1315, the 7th line from the top. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So it says, Vahainu, the kol zeh rak bechinas habirur v'azichur de nefesh habamis. All this is the birur, the separation, the clarification, the refinement and the refinement of the animal soul. And also all the matters, all the affairs in the Tachtenim, the lowest of worlds. Like we said, we're not just talking about the animal soul, we're also talking Chelkei Be'elam. Each one our allocated place in this world. All this we've refined. Initially, it was a place of darkness. It was a place of driven by self-interest, by its own independent consciousness. Now we've illuminated it with the divine light of the divine soul. It's even affected the animal soul and refined it. Not just weakened it, but also refined it. And so too, like we learned earlier, that this has a ripple effect, it's also affected the Kelim Lamaila. Like we said, they've also become refined and they can draw down even more energy all the way from Etzem Ha'er. So we have further refined those containers as we learned. But all this is a refinement of it all, not a transformation. So now he's going to go into discuss transformation, not necessarily an explanation, but again, it's contrast. So this is a slow case being built up. As I said, we need to be patient till the Rebbe Rashab develops the whole idea. So now he continues and he says, Mamish, now he's saying Mamish, total transformation, literal, complete transformation of darkness to light, hu ba'avedas tzadikim gemurim. That's in the Aveda of tzadikim gemurim. Because in Tanya, that he cited before from chapter 12 and other places, there he says that Beinani, what does the Beinani do? He doesn't have any, his thought, speech, and action, which means his deliberate thought, speech, and action is all controlled by the animal, by the divine soul. The animal soul is under is under the control of the divine soul. But he says that the animal soul has not been changed. Its koiches, its faculties are still animal faculties. Its expression, in other words, the thinking of the person, his speech and his actions in the Beinani are under control by the divine soul. But that's not his sapcha. But tzaddikim there in chapter 10, he says tzaddikim do create his sapcha. According to Tanya, who ba'avedas tzaddikim gmurim, are by the tzaddikim gmurim, not just tzaddik, but tzaddikim gmurim, like he says in chapter 10 there. And when they're serving God with the avarabba, with a great love, out of pleasures, that highest level of love. And we learned about it earlier too, when we talked about b'chol meidecha and mesiras nefesh and all of that. And ubebalei tshuva amitim, and by true balei tshuva. There you will find this sapcha, but that's not discussed right now. He says, "Ukamoshi is boyd," as shall be explained, and this will be explained in quite a few pages from now. I know on page 1342 for sure, maybe even earlier, but on 1342 he definitely goes back to explain this. So just tell you where we're at. We're right now 1315. So we're talking about 30 pages, a little less than 30 pages, like it was 27 pages from now. But the point is, he just wants to make the contrast that what he says in Tanya, that's the Beinani, but tzaddikim gemurim and true balei tshuva do have the power of hisap chamamsh. But he's not discussing it now. He's still just at the cusp, at the beginnings of understanding the contrast of being marchiv, of expanding the boundary, the domain of kedusha and oir in contrast to complete transformation of the lowest level of kelim, of the animal soul, of the nitzutzes themselves, and so on. But the Rebbe Rashab is just for the record stating there is this level, and he's associated with tzaddikim gemurim and bali tshuva. But the service of God that is not in the form of a sapcha mamish. Again, I pointed out in Ayin Beis very often uses the word mamish. In other words, this sapcha, you have some form of transformation going on, but it's not mamish. So in other words, the animal soul is inspired. And as he said, Meseda ba'atzme, even on its own, it's already now stimulated by Elokus and wants it. But it's not mamish. He says, so when it's not mamish, so when it's not a full transformation, then it's still in the category of increasing and expanding the gvul hakdusha, the boundary or the domain of holiness, the b'chinas teis v'ser, within the state of the abundance of light. So you've increased light and a deep, profound light, divine light. You've brought it down as well, but it's still about the expansion of that light as opposed to full transformation of the thing itself, of the tachtenim themselves. Like he says right away, now he says it explicitly. I've been qualifying it all the time. Says the Rebbe Rashab, clearly he's sensing that you could think it's just a rak. It's not just a rak. It's not just. This too, to be marchiv, to increase and expand the Eir HaKdusha, the light of holiness, is also a very high and exalted level. Ukanal, as was explained earlier. So he's just qualifying to make sure. Don't think it's not just. Let's not dismiss it. It's just very high and calls it gavoya v'nayla ma'id. Even this level. How much more so, of course, the Isapcha, which is the full transformation that will happen in the future. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to come and tie it together, sum up what's been said till now. And the next paragraph is going to begin a deeper explanation of understanding what exactly is the process of transformation. So, as I said a number of times, this is really in stages. He's already explained it earlier in the context of Helama Atzmi, then went back to understanding what is the purpose of the soul coming down below and illuminating, and the different levels of how the light illuminates the darkness to the point of not just dispelling it, but transforming it. So it's all a build-up of a bunch of different pieces to fully understand the idea of Ein Eid, ultimately, of that full transformation that the Kelim themselves, Elokim itself, will radiate. Not just reveal the Havaya, the Eir, that is before the Tzimtzum, but also it itself will radiate. So now he's tying together what we just said. V'nimtza. This is like a conclusive type of statement. V'nimtza means, so from this we derive, or from this we, v'nimtza, from this we conclude. The kol zeh hu masha'ir deiches ha'cheshach. V'nimtza. That all this is that what the Eir is dispelling, is pushing aside the darkness. Not that the darkness itself is radiating. So it's the light entering, pushing aside the darkness, instead of the darkness itself radiating. So now he's going back to literally the first lines in volume 3, where remember when we spoke about V'yadaita Ayin v'shavesa levavecha ki Havayu Elokim b'shamayim mimal v'al metochas, and then Einoid. So Havayu Elokim is the gili of Oir, even in the Mokam of Cheshach. Even though the Tzimtzum from Elokim, Havayu Elokim, that the Havaya, as it is in the higher levels, comes down even b'shamayim mimal, even on Oretz metochas, down below. But it's all the gili, like he says, that all this goes into the category, as he's going to explain, that Vizel Klolosin Shen is Baralil. This is the general idea that was discussed earlier in volume 2 and concluded in the beginning of volume 3. What was discussed? That the goal is, like V'yadaita Ayin, to unite Havaya, which is Gili Eir of Elokus, with Elokim, which is Tzimtzum and Helam. Ayidei Hipuch HaTzimtzum, through the transformation of the tzimtzum. We learned about that we are going to transform the tzimtzum, that it should no longer be a force that conceals, but a force that reveals. In the form of Ratzav V'Shuv. This is the big theme in volume 2, that is through Ratzav V'Shuv. I referred to it earlier. It referred to it earlier also at the end of the paragraph on page 1313. So what did he say there? V'yadaita hayoim, he said, is yom v'layla. What means hayoim? It's day and night. Gilui and tzimtzum. Gilui and helam. So v'yadaita hayoim means that that also the helam, also the night, will also radiate with the light of Havaya, which is that the tzimtzum will no longer just be will no longer just be seen as a concealer, but its whole purpose is to reveal. Tzimtzum b'shvila gilui, and the whole gilui is to come through the tzimtzum and be revealed. But the focus there is all on Havaya, hu Elokim, on the gilui, like he says. Commission is again, as was explained earlier at length, and it was at length. So Ratzav V'Shuv was Yom and Laila, as he explained there. The Ratzeh, the yearning, and the Shuv is returning. I think the Yom was Shuv and the night was Ratzeh, if I recall correctly, or maybe the other way around. Later, Ratzeh V'Shuv became Shabbos and the weekdays and the Shabbos. And yes, the weekdays and the Shabbos was Ratzeh and Shuv. He spoke there at length how the Ratzeh V'Shuv is the key, that you explain 2 reasons why there's Ratzeh V'Shuv, because the energy that below is yearning to go up and then it internalizes it. That's the way we transform the darkness into light. But he says, Kol zeh hu b'chinas d'chias ha'cheshech. Yet all this is still the dispelling of, the pushing aside. In other words, the darkness till now concealed, you're pushing it aside. So it's the pushing aside of the darkness and the overpowering power that is Gabra, the dominance of Ur. Which this means that there should be the revelation of Shem Havaya, the Havaya, the way it is in its core state, like we said here, Etzem Ur, and it should be completely revealed, literally revealed in the name Elokim, even though Elokim on its own is a form of concealment. However, it's not the highest level. What's the highest level? Transforming the darkness to light. Zehu, Shashem Elokim atzmei yoyer. This is still that Havaya is shining through Elokim. Elokim is the Gilui Mamish of Havaya and Etzem Havaya through Elokim. But the ultimate is that the Elokim itself should radiate. And this is literally the same words he used on page 1207. On the bottom of 1207, and explained a little more on 1208 and 1209, there he began this idea that Elokim itself radiates. So you see clearly he's connecting it all now, as he's setting the stage to further explain the idea. Elokim atzmei yoyer. Omnom. However, the Rebbe Rashab now is going to introduce an even more subtle difference in his sapcha itself. So even in transforming now of Elokim atzmei yoyer, there's also 2 ways. He's going to basically say one way is that the oyer affects that Elokim itself should radiate. We're not talking anymore Havayu Elokim. We're talking about Elokim itself, but that too can happen in 2 ways. One is, like he says, Omnom in this total transformation, there's also 2 methods, 2 ways. For who? And that is if the darkness on its own is transformed into light, or the transformation is happening through the Oyer. That the Oyer, the light, is transforming the darkness. Now you'll say, doesn't that sound like what we just learned? No. Havaya Elokim is not that the darkness itself is being transformed. It's the light is dominating, and the darkness is also now a keli, and it's shining through the darkness. We're talking about the darkness itself should reveal. And that can be either literally on its own, it's coming from within its own very power that we'll learn about from its essential power, that there's something in darkness that light simply does not have, or is the light that is ultimately the one that's causing that this darkness itself should radiate. As yesterday, I actually alluded to it or said it explicitly, that ultimately we need to understand that. What is the relationship? Is it that the darkness is going to reveal a helam atzmi, or is it going to reveal a form of light? So it's not what he's saying here exactly, but he's definitely saying that the first is the darkness itself has something that light doesn't have. The second is that the light is the one that's affecting this transformation. Now we're going to understand this as we learn further, obviously. The ima yes, and even though shebishneim hu shacheshach nepach la'er, and even though in both these methods, in both these ways, the darkness itself is being transformed to light, not just being dispelled and the light is shining through it. Yes, b'zeh hefresh gadol. Even though it's both in the very transformation of the darkness itself, nevertheless, there's a big difference between these two methods, these two approaches. Because when the darkness transforms on its own, then the darkness itself has become light. By contrast, when the transformation comes through the Oyer, that the Oyer is causing it, then is that the Oyer is coming in place of the Cheshach. It's transforming it, but as the Oyer is replacing the Cheshach, so to speak. Whereas in the first way, the Cheshach itself is Oyer. So even though in the second way as well, the darkness becomes light, it's not that the darkness itself has become light. The Cheshach has now been replaced by light. That the Cheshach itself is Oyer. But it's not that the Cheshach, as it is Cheshach, became Oyer. Is the Cheshach becoming like Oyer. Whereas the first one is deeper because the Cheshach itself has something that Oyer doesn't have. As we'll learn about the Helam Atzmi, and as we learn, and we shall learn. But he's going to now go into a long explanation, explaining it with the sweetening of the waters, that there's two ways to sweeten water. Talking about the Pasuk in Beshalach, where it says that the Jews that the Jews said the Mayim Merurim. That's when the Jews complained that the water was bitter, and that how Moshe Rabbeinu sweetened the waters. Now, this topic began a few pages back. If you go back to the page 1307, he already began speaking about this. But now, and then he went off to the Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, that the whole purpose of the Neshama is to radiate the darkness, not just to radiate, but to transform. The whole discussion we just had here about the different levels of expanding Eir HaKdusha. So now he's actually coming back to the beginning, top of page 1307. So he's now going to continue from where he left off there in explaining this concept. But he says, but now he spelled out that even in the very transformation of darkness, which is not Havaya Elokim, that's still the Oyer shining through the darkness. Even when the darkness is transformed, one is that the darkness itself is transformed, and the other is that the darkness has become light. And he says it's a hefresh gadol. It's a big difference between it. It's not a subtle difference. But the explanation is going to come now. But before we continue, let me stop here for any questions. Okay. So, as I said, he didn't explain it yet. He just made a statement what it means. And we'll understand this over as we continue and progress here in our discussion. Just looking something up 1 second, please. Okay. Ready to move forward? Okay, fasten your seatbelts yet again. We're going to take off to another level here. So he's beginning now As I said, he began on 1307, but now he's going to go into much more detail. But I will repeat what he said on 1307 when he spoke about talking there about tzaddikim and Baalei Tshuva. What's the difference in their tshuva? So he spoke that you can have a situation where a greater light comes in and it ultimately illuminates the darkness. So he said, that he immersed, he threw a sweet branch into the bitter waters, and the waters got sweetened. So the Rebbe Rashab says there, I'm just reading from top of 1307, it will help us understand where we're going now. That's why I'm just for the continuity. He says that eitz is the eitz hachayim, the tree of life. And the sweetness was not just that you have sweet something and then you pour so much something, you have bitter water, and you pour so much sweet water that it automatically overrides and what's the word? It overrides the bad waters, not because anything was transformed. It's just like putting in a lot of sugar into something that was bitter. So the bitter remains bitter, but it's now completely bottled b'shishim, so to speak. It's completely nullified. That's the word I wanted. Kim shamayim aroim, but in this case, we're not talking about that. Kim shamayim aroim gufa nimtuku, v'nasa mayim besukim. That the bad waters, the bitter waters, they themselves were sweetened and became sweet waters. For who shama nasa mosuk, that the bitter has become sweet. That's the power of the tree of life, where there's no ra. In Eitza das tevera, there's teva and ra. There's a tfisa, there's an achiza, something negative. Alkei nasa mesukim betzim. That's why they became fundamentally sweet. The kol zeh b'chinas achsodim the eri yosher. But then that's all comes that the chsodim of eri yosher have transformed the water itself, not just overpowered it. But then he says, it's known that the gvuras are sweetened not by the chesed, but they themselves are sweetened by their source, by their root in gvura itself. So even when the bitter has become sweet, but since it came through chesed, it's not a complete sweetening. Adayin. The true sweetness, when that itself is affected by its root and causes the bitter to become sweet on its own, not just due to the influence of the sweet waters. We're not talking about overwhelming it. It actually influences, like we just learned here, that the oir has transformed the cheshech itself, but it's still through the oir. It came through chesed. That the waters themselves became sweet. So we have to understand, what does it mean that the gvuras are sweetened at their root? And what's the virtue of that? Here I'm talking about, what's the advantage of that over it being sweetened by chesed? When at the end of the day, they both cause that the waters themselves should be sweetened. So you see the similarity between these three levels of how waters are sweetened with what we learned here. The waters could be sweetened simply because the oil is so powerful, so it overwhelms the darkness or the bitterness. It could also transform the bitterness, but it's still coming as a result of the oil or of the sweet, or that the bitter itself is able to access a place in its root that it itself gets sweetened. And that's the ultimate transformation. So this is the stage set now where it's going to start Ubir Inyan. Ubir Inyan, and the explanation of this, Yesh Lahagdim, need to preface, Masha Kosav, Vayavoyu Marosa, what it says in the Pasuk in Bishalach. They came to Marosa, to the place called Marosa, V'lo Yochlu, and they couldn't drink because the waters kimarim him. because the waters were bitter. So the Jews arrived to this place, Marasa. That's why it's called Marasa, because the waters were bitter. So what did they happen? Vayorayu Hashem ate, and God, what's the word? Like threw, not through. There's a, what do you do when you throw a, like a javelin? There's a word for it. It's inserted, It's like when you shoot an arrow. So God basically sent a tree, and he sent it toward the water, into the water, and the waters were sweetened. That's what the pasuk says. So now he's going to analyze this pasuk. We already have some preview, but we're going to get into the details of what happened here. So the Rebbe Rashab is now going to go into detail in his classic fashion, and we're going to start after the pasuk. What does it say in Medrash Rabbah? Ve'isa b'Medrash Rabbah b'Shalach Parsha Chav Gimel. That in Medrash Rabbah, and the Medrash called Medrash Rabbah on this Parsha in B'Shalach, chapter 23 in the Medrash, u'b'Parsha Vayakel Parsha Nun, and also Medrash Rabbah in Vayakel in chapter 50. Harihud Ksiv, that this, what it says about the sweetening of the waters, is what it says in the pasuk. It's associating it with another pasuk. This is a classic way the Medrash associates psukim. He says, this, what we read here, this is what it says elsewhere. Where the Eibishter says in Yirmiyahu Lamed, this is in the book of Yirmiyahu, the prophet, chapter 30. The Eibishter say, I will, Arucha, I think, is a rod. I will send, I will
Arucha
raise.
is a refuah. Arucha is a refuah, healing.
Arucha is feeling?
Healing.
Are you sure?
Healing.
Yeah. I'm on safari. I will bring healing to you and cure you of your wounds.
Yeah, a cure of your wounds is clear. I thought Arucha is connected to the word like a rod. Like here, 8, maybe not. Okay, fine. Anyway, I will bring Aruch Lecha healing, from your afflictions. What does he translate Makesecha? From your
wounds, from your wounds, Pagaim, your wounds.
And okay, and I will heal you from your wounds. So the Medrash is associating this with the sweetening of the waters. So the Medrash is teaching like this. It's not just I will heal you from your wounds. From the very wounds, the very wounds that I've afflicted you with, in other words, the wound itself will become the source of healing. It's essentially like the concept of homeopathy or even antibiotics, that they use the illness itself, the disease itself, to heal the disease. Ultimately a hisapcha. So there's a way of healing. A person has, God forbid, a wound or an illness, and you bring something that heals it, something from the outside. But then he says from the very makkah, the wound itself, that will be the source of your healing. And the Medrash continues, say ulamat, go and learn this. Where do we learn this from? Moto, from the story in Moto. Shahida leMoshe dover mar, that he extended, or he shot from Moto. Shahida leMoshe dover mar, something sweet. V'hislich lamayim, and extended it into the water.
Bitter thing.
What?
Dover Omar. Hashem showed Moshe Dover Omar, a bitter thing.
A bitter, yeah, I said a bitter thing. Dover, what did I say?
Sweet.
Oh, I said Hoyre. I thought from the word Vayerehu, Hashem. Maybe right. Maybe he indicated to Moshe, the Dover Mar, something bitter. I think here Hoyre may be from the word Vayerehu Hashem, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Something bitter. V'hishlach lamayim, and he threw it into the water. V'nimta ka'amayim. So we see, and the water got sweetened. We see what? That the bitter thing turned into sweetness. That's what the Medrash says. Yeah. Eze Eitz Haya. I think this is continuing the Medrash. What kind of tree was it? Says the Medrash now. What kind of tree was this? What kind of branch? What branch was it? Yesh Emrim Zayis. Some say an olive branch. V'yesh Emrim Arava. Some say a willow branch. V'yesh Emrim Hardefuni. What is Hardefuni? Not sure. To look it up. Not Hardefuni. Hardefuni.
Hardufni.
Huh?
I think Hardufni.
But it doesn't say a vav before the fei. Hardfuni maybe. Maybe I can look it up if you want. I'm not sure what the third thing is. It's okay. Olive, willow. I remember from other places. I can't remember now. Maybe if you Google the word, it'll give you a translation. Okay. Okay, so three opinions of what kind of branch was it. But regardless, Makol Mokim, whatever the branch was, Eitz Mar Hoya. One thing is for sure, it was a bitter branch. V'himti kamayim hamorim. And it sweetened the bitter waters. So we have to find that. V'chein atamoitze be'alisha. And we also find this is probably still the Medrash. Shehimti kamayim b'melech. We also find by Elisha that he sweetened the waters with what? Not with sugar, b'melech, with salt. So you see here that it's not a sweetening coming from an outside force. It's using the bitterness itself to turn something bitter into sweet, which is, of course, a big chiddush. The Rebbe Rashab continues and now brings from a Zohar. So again, the thoroughness. He's making it very comprehensive. There
was also bitter water in Yericho, and he said to them, Ukhu melach.
Okay. Very good. I'm looking up myself. I have a medrash here, but I have to go get it. You want me to go look it up, or we don't need it?
By Hardufni, he said, a creeper, the berries of which were known to be injurious to animals.
What kind of berries?
Creeper, the berries of which were known to
How
be...
do you spell creeper? What's spell creeper? Creeper.
Creeper. They are known,
berries. Okay, I never heard of that.
They are known to be injurious to animals.
Okay, I understand. It's a certain poisonous or bitter berries. That's what it is. You know, if you give me a second, let me look it up. I'll look it up right now. 1 second.
Rabbi Jacobson, I don't know if you can hear, but it's a form of ivy, a wall ivy. In this case, hardafne, it's a creeper. I mean, I guess it instead of going on the walls, which is hardofanin, that's on the wall ivy. It's a form of that, which is a creeper, meaning it crawls on the ground. It's an ivy that's on the ground.
Okay.
I don't know that it has a particular name, but Za'etz Hashem, it was the trunk of an ivy that was thrown.
I didn't find
That's
it in the Medrash. You saw it in the Medrash?
Well, this is Jastrow, who's classic, defines.
I know he's a translator.
Terms.
He's a dictionary. We know he's famous. Okay, I couldn't find the Medrash. I have to look it up more. I'll find what I find. Okay. Anyway, regardless, it's something bitter. 3 opinions. That he sweetened the water with salt. That the water was sweetened with salt, I should say. I'm continuing. Reish Ayin Beis, and in Zohar on this pasuk in Beshalach, page 60, top of 60 top 60b on top. Isa ein eitz elotera. Whenever you say tree, ein eitz elotera, tree doesn't mean anything but Torah. Shenemer eitz chayim hi, like it says that Torah is eitz chayim hi lemachzikim ba. It's a tree. It's a tree of life. Eitz chayim hi. V'nimtza lefi haZohar, according to the Zohar, that hoya ha'etz eitz hachayim. So another, well, I don't know if it's another opinion, but according to the Zohar, it's Eitz HaChaim, it's the tree of life. Because he says Eitz Chaim. Not sure what the proof of that is. It's Torah, I understand, but who says Eitz Chaim is necessarily Eitz HaChaim? But anyway, he's associating the tree of life with the tree of life in Gan Eden with the Torah, which is tree Eitz Chaim. Va'inyan. Okay, so he's established now the 3 opinions in the Medrash. That is olive, willow, or this vine that we're talking about. These creeper, something that all bitter. The Zohar says it's Eitz Chaim. Now he says Va'inyan. Now he's going to explain it. Va'inyan. The inyan of this is the hine mei moto. What does the mei moto represent? These bitter waters. Heim b'chinas hagvuras. That's the level of gvuras. Bitterness is associated with gvura, with severities, with judgments. Sweetness is associated with chesed. So whenever you say mar and mosuk, sweet and bitter, you're talking about chesed is sweetness and gvura is bitterness. So they come. So the level of gvura is again, the thoroughness. Everything is sourced there. Is, as I've mentioned a number of times, is from a great Makubal whose name was Meir Papyrus. He was from the Talmidim of the Arizal, and he wrote like a type of little, like, I don't call it encyclopedia, but he took is in the letters of Aleph Beis Gimel, all items like tapuach or eitz or anything sheleg. You look it up under the letter shin, he'll tell you what the Kabbalistic level or sphira or level in Ashtalshus associates with that. And the Yer Nesiv, the commentary there elaborates. Chassidus brings this extensively. He's a very authoritative Makubal, and he identifies based on Kabbalistic sources, Zohar and other places, everything you're looking for. You want to know what is a Shulchan, what is a Shamayim, you name it, and it'll give you the Kabbalistic associated level that associates with it.
Meir Lapidus?
Papiro. Pei Aleph, Pei Yud, Reish Samach.
Oh.
Papyrus. I think he was Italian, maybe. Meir Papyrus, yeah. You'll see him. He's one of the people who helped also publish the Arizal's writings. So you'll see Hagos, there's Hagos Tzemach, there's a Meir Papyrus. He's a well-known Makubal from the first generations after the Arizal. He helped organize, and he wrote this. He also wrote other books. He has actually a very interesting book. I have it here somewhere called Eitz Chaim, where he took the whole Seder Shtalshus and turned it into, the book opens up like an accordion. You have the whole picture of his Seder Shtalshus in one big map. He made a map of the Seder Shtalshus. I have it here. I could show it to you. Where is it? I have it somewhere. Anyway, this is Ma'ir. Okay. So what does he say? Ois mem sif tezayin, right? Mem mora, modim. So he teaches what's mora in Kabbalah. So mem would be the letter mem, and sif tezayin would be the 16th section in mem. Mayim, he says mayim rather. B'bchinas achsadim, v'gam b'bchinas agvuris. That mayim exists in the level of chsadim, kindness, and in the level of gvuris. Ubiyoyer nesiv sham ne'er nesiv is a commentary on Ma'ir, where he actually brings the actual sources. So he says shekeinhu b'zoyhat al posig yihirakia. I don't know why it says yihirakia. It says yihirakia, but I think it should be yihirakia. Maybe there's another pasuk yihirakia. Anyway, the Zoyar, that's what it says in Zoyar. That water has two types of waters. The waters of chsadim that are connected to chesed, which is sweet, and the waters of gvuris. So Rebbe Rashab is really pouring on the sources here. Look in Zoyar, Bereshis 17a, Ube Migdash Melech. Migdash Melech is another Kabbalistic commentary on the Zoyar. The Mayim Elokim v'Tatoyin hem b'bchinas chesed v'gvura.
They are the same pages. Today, the pages in the Zohar.
Yeah, Zohar is one of the only things the same pages. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Shalah is not, but the Zohar is. Yes, they made sure, like with Gemara, that all the Zohar should be printed with the same pages, even different heitzos, even different editions. You see, that's like they to stick to be consistent. Yeah. So what does it say, Migdash Melech? And the Migdash Melech on the Zohar, that my Miloyin, the higher waters, and the lower waters is the level of Chesed and Gvura. Bottom line, he wants to establish that in water, there's the level of Gvura, which is the bitter waters. The Sham Sof Amid Beis, the Zohar, and there at the bottom of page 2, meaning at probably 17b, he says at the bottom of the page, Shem B'chinas Tchar v'Nukva. This is the level of male and female, the masculine and the feminine. I'm just going to finish. Let me finish all these sources. I see he goes for a while here. Wow. Look at Migdash Melech, Pasha Vayikra, Daf Yud Amid Beis, on the Zohar Vayikra 10b, the Mayim Elokim, the higher waters, Hem B'chinas Chsadim, Shenichlolim B'Zah, that are encompassed in Zah, which is Tchar, which is the masculine, Umayim Tatoyin, and the lower waters, Hem B'chinas Gvuras the Zah. That's the Gvuras of Zah. Shenim Shachim B'Malchus, that extend and transmit into Malchus, which is the feminine. So he's reconciling between male, masculine, feminine, and Chesed and Gvura. U'b'me'er Sham Sif Tzadik Beis. When you look at Me'er Sham on the and Sif Tzadik Beis, Mar Mitzad Hadinim. That bitterness comes due to the severities, due to the judgments of Gvura. Gam HaMalchus Nikra Mora. Also, Malchus is called bitter. Ki Adinim Gevrim Ba. Because in Malchus, the Dinim dominate there. The judgments dominate there. Ubesif Tzadik Dalad, in Me'er, he brings a third Me'er in section 94. Mora Nikra Lilis. Mora is called Lilis, was Lilith. Lilith was, from Gvura, a negative feminine angel, a temptress, as it's known. Vahainu, and what we see from this, Vahainu, this means that B'chinas HaGvuras v'dinim the Malchus hu achizas hachitzenim keneda. That in the Gvuras and dinim, in the judgments and the severities and judgments of Malchus, is where the chitzenim, the outer forces, that's where they nurse their energy from. Remember, chitzenim always like yenikas hachitzenim. Where does the spiritual bacteria, where do the spiritual toxins get nourished from? So they go to the places that are where they can get energy from. They will not go to a place where where a person is completely, where the defenses are high. They go to vulnerable places. And where there's gvuras and dinim, whenever there's judgments and severities, that's why one has to be very careful when there's gvuras and dinim, because the chitzenim always come to try to steal some energy, so to speak, from there. V'ze'in mei moto. Let me just finish this section here. And this is the inyan of the bitter waters. B'chinas klipas nega. This is the level of klipas nega, which is the bright klippa, the bright shell. It's still a klippa, it's still a covering, but it's not like shalosh klippas atmeis, which is completely dark. This is more a bright, a little more, there's a light that shines through. It's not totally dark. Shenechaz b'chinas hagvuras. But where does klippas nega hold on to? It holds on to gvura. When there's judgment, that's where it comes to try to, like when you see, if someone is in a position, let's say, when they're vulnerable and they're standing in judgment because they did a crime and the verdict is guilty and there's judgment, that's when those negative angels that always come to complain and have, that's when they come. They love to come when there's critique going on. That's why you say you have to be very careful when you criticize someone. Or there shouldn't be a kitrig. There shouldn't be, when you complain, or time of dinim, because the negative forces say, oh, you see, look what they did. They come to God and say, you see, they're guilty of something. So Gvura always lends itself to the negative, the avenging angels basically always come to glean energy from there. Anyway, that's what he says is Mei Moto. That's what it represents. The Klippas Nega, where the Gvuras are holding on. Okay. I don't want to end on a negative, so let's end on the positive. Vaham toke de Mei Hamora. Then based on this, what's the sweetening of the bitter waters? In other words, what's the symbolism in the Torah? Why did this story happen in the first place? If God was going to give them sweet water, he could have just given them sweet water. Why did he have to make it in a way that the waters were bitter? And then this whole thing throwing the branch, and the branch is bitter, and the bitterness itself becomes sweet. What's the point? So he says the sweetening of the waters. Its point was that the gvuras themselves should become sweetened and transformed to chesed. That the judgment should be turned into chesed. We learned about this earlier, if you remember, about the Yom Adin with Rosh Hashanah. Now that it brings to mind, if you remember that the din itself should become chesed. Well, I'll look it up. It's a bunch of pages earlier. I'm trying to remember when he spoke about maybe by the beginning of the pasuk Havaya Chatem Merivov. I think there, how the enemies are eliminated. He talks there about, because we say it on Rosh Hashanah. So if I recall correctly, he's talking about dinim and gvuras there. But meanwhile, let's continue. Nepchel Chsadim. I think here we'll stop because he's going to now explain in detail the process of how this happens. Okay, I just wanted to conclude. So the bottom line is we're talking about transforming the bitter to sweet, that the bitterness itself, the gvura itself, not just is overpowered by chesed. It's not just that let's say the defense attorney wins over the prosecutor. You want the prosecutor himself to agree and say, yes, the person deserves is acquitted, or the person is lezakai, deserves merit. That's what you want. You want the very prosecution, the gvura itself, to be transformed, which I recall clearly spoke about earlier. So I'm sure it's all connected. So I'll stop here by the last lines on the bottom of page 13, 15. And I'll stop if anybody has any questions about what we learned so far, even though here was mostly just explaining the measures, the zayhars, the meir, what exactly is bitter waters, and the idea of gvura and chesed based on the Kabbalistic sources you just cited.
He still didn't explain why ein hagvuris nimtokis elo b'shorshon.
This will be the next 25 pages. Of course not. This is not a quick fix. He's going to speak about it in the next 25 pages. No, he didn't. He just asked the question. He didn't explain it yet. No. Because he's going to explain different ways that the bitterness can be sweetened. It could also be sweetened by chesed is causing this, or that it itself gets sweetened, as we're going to learn. We're going to learn the different levels. I think he's going to talk about 3 or even 4 levels of transformation when we go through this. Okay. So we stop here, bottom of 1315.